It's been a little bit since we last checked in with our greedy, yellow-clad, garlic-loving miser, hasn't it? Let's fix that. Hello everyone and welcome to Let's Play Wario Land 2, the direct follow-up to Super Mario Land 3, Wario Land. Chapter 1, One Noisy Morning, Story 1, Turn Off the Alarm Clock. First things first, Wario, get out of bed. There's a whole lot of shenanigans going on in your castle we earned at the end of the first game, at least in one of the endings. So immediately, Wario Land 2 is a slightly different genre than the first game. Wario Land 1, as its subtitle would say, is Super Mario Land 3, and thus it's a pretty, I'm not gonna say by the numbers Mario platformer, but it's structured closer to how the mainline Mario games are, just there's hidden treasures to find, and you got different endings for the amount of money you ended the game with. And while collecting money is still a very big part of this series in particular moving forward, it's no longer closer to Mario in how its stages are laid out. Wario Land 2 Beyond is a bit more of a puzzle platformer. The biggest indicator of that actually is Wario's health. He's invincible completely. He'll still take damage. When you take hits, all you lose is money from your coin count on the bottom right. Largely though, otherwise, Wario has a lot of the same moves he did in the first game, particularly the ground pound by holding down when you jump. You can do a high jump by holding up and pressing the jump button. You can also, I'm gonna call it badnik bouncing because of the Sonic term for it, but if you hold up and A after jumping on an enemy, you'll jump higher and all that. But Wario's main moveset actually involves certain enemies, but we'll more talk about that when we see the first instance of that. The big thing you need to get used to in this game in specific, though, is looking for hidden passageways. And this first level does a pretty good job of tutorializing that by having the green jars lead the way. Oftentimes, there's a completely unsuspicious looking ceiling, wall, or floor that you can either shoulder charge through using the B button, or ground pound through, or jump through to get more coins. Worth noting, you do still want to get as many coins as you can throughout the game, and I'm going to be doing that in this LP. As, for one thing, personal high score stuff is always something that you can do with friends. But also, the coins you can spend in the game still do have a pretty notable purpose. Speaking of which, when you see this very suspicious looking door we can break the dresser to get to, let's take a look in here for our treasure minigame. Like in Wario Land 1, there are treasures in levels, but now there's a treasure in every level rather than just most. And the way it works is you can select a difficulty for increasing amounts of 50 coins, and the chest will be locked by a lock that has an icon of an enemy on it. You then need to select which one of the tiles is the one that matches that. The difficulty only changes how long they stay turned around on. Personally speaking, I think hard is pretty easy to deal with all the same, but that's just me. I think normal is probably going to be what most people are comfortable with. The way I tend to do that minigame is that when the tiles flip, I kind of dissociate my eyes a little bit in either direction to try and see as many tiles as I can at once rather than focusing on a specific area. And I look for the voids of color, effectively. In specific, the easiest tiles for me to find are the cloud, because it has the least amount of black pixels on it. The DD, the dangerous duck, which has, I think, the most amount of black on its sprite. And the other bird-type enemy that's also still relatively yellow as they stand out from the crowd. It's when you get, like, the mallet ape or the weird spiky blob enemy and all that, where it kind of is easy to get lost in. So, in terms of the enemies we're going to be dealing with, largely they act more as obstacles and puzzle solutions rather than hazards. And that's largely, again, due to the fact that Wario can't really die in this game. But worth noting, you have several ways you can take enemies out yourself. For one thing, you have your shoulder charge. As long as you're hitting an enemy in the back or to the side, you're going to kill them with that. Jumping on enemies like in Wario Land 1 isn't a guaranteed kill, though. It just stuns them, which you can use to then pick them up. And you can then throw them upwards, downwards, and all that. And the longer you hold the B button when you're about to throw them, the farther they'll get thrown and the harder they'll get thrown, to the point where if they hit a wall, if you're fully charged, they're also going to die from that. Otherwise, you can just ground pound them, which is honestly the most effective way in general to deal with enemies. Very often in this LP, you'll see me jump, kill an enemy, and then still fall down and the screen will shake like that. That's because I'm almost always holding the down button on the D-pad when I jump. There's the alarm clock we're looking for, so shoulder dashing to that will end the stage. At the end of every stage, like in Wario Land 1, the coins you have are taken from your stage total into your total coin purse for an overall tally. But that's not all we're doing with them, because there's one more minigame at the end of every single stage after this screen. This is the number matching minigame. The way this is going to work, for now at least, is that once you select play, the 3x3 tiles will be randomized and a number will be selected. You then have to pay 50 coins at a time from your total coin reserve to reveal a panel, and slowly figure out which one of the 10 numbers this potentially could be. I like to get it to a point where it's roughly a 50-50, because I feel like that's where I'm most comfortable with it. But you can just keep spending until you know exactly what number it is. Usually the ones that are hardest to figure out is if it's specifically a 3 and 8, a 5, 6, 8, or 9, or a 1 and a 7. Those are the things I usually find myself between. For doing that minigame, you get 1 of 50 panel pieces. Then in order to get the true and final ending, we need to find all of. And then the game autosaves. Chapter 1, Story 2, Turn Off the Giant Faucet. Yeah, our castle is kind of getting flooded, isn't it? So this level introduces water and water currents, which are pretty straightforward as they are. Wario's underwater control in this game feels a little weird. He's always inherently rising. But you can press the B button to dash in any direction. You can also press the A button to dash specifically upwards, which there's times you're going to want to use one or the other, but I generally tend to just mash the B button to do anything in water instead, as I feel a little more in control of it. With that said, the water levels in this game, while they're not slow or tedious, they definitely have some annoying collision detection in some of them with very specific hazards of sorts that we'll talk about when we eventually reach them. Oh, also, something I should mention very early on here. This is Wario Land 2, because it's the second main series game, but it's actually the third game in the overall sub-series. As between the release of Wario Lands 1 and 2, they released a Virtual Boy game, just entitled Virtual Boy Wario Land. That is its own completely unique game with its own unique little ideas and assets and all that. I will be tackling that game as well at a later date, as I wanted to get right into Wario Land 2 into 3 at some point, as I really want to get to Wario Land 4 at some point so I can talk about the childhood trauma inflicted upon me just because of how overly stressful a very specific mechanic is in that game. But I'll save that for when we eventually reach it. Now, largely in Wario Land 1, you really always wanted to do the high jump, but smartly so, Wario Land 2 actually does give you points where you just want to do the standard hop instead of the high jump. Like right there, if I had done the high jump, it would have hit the ceiling. And I would have been knocked down into the water and sent back to the left. Now, something I should note. Part 1 here, we're going to see all the autosaves, we're going to see these minigames at full speed and all that. But starting in Part 2, I do speed these up to approximately 4 times speed, because at the end of the day, it's the same minigame every time. And that's time I can save and make sure this isn't a 20-part or 30-part long LP. Something else I should cover this early in, by the way, is why I'm playing this specific version. For those that don't know, Wario Land 2 was originally released in the first half of 1998 for the original Game Boy. The Game Boy Color version I'm playing here released in late 98 to late 99, depending on your territory. The main reason largely came down to I find it more visually interesting. There are some notable details missing in some cases due to background colors having to be changed for certain sprites and all that. For instance, the windows that you can see on screen right now on the original Game Boy release, they actually had an arch at the top of them. And they got rid of those for the Game Boy Color release because the color limitations would have meant the wall behind the windows also would have been blue, and that wouldn't have exactly looked great. And in my comparatively small experience of Wario Land 2 on either version of the game, the details that are lost don't matter enough to me to warrant playing the Game Boy version. The Game Boy Color version I just find more visually appealing despite those details. I'll talk more about my experience with the game coming up in the next stage, though, because we're here at the end of the stage. This game has several ways levels can end compared to Wario Land 1, which was either getting a switch hit or hitting the end door. In this case, we now have to hit the faucet. Approximately 3 times to shut off the water. Still gotta, like, get all that water out of there, but at least no more's flowing. In fact, now I think about it, Wario, why do you have that faucet? Is it meant to be like a moat for sieges? Is it your bathtub? What's the deal with that, buddy? With the number matching game, by the way, largely I think you can get a pretty good educated guess for which of the 10 numbers it is by the time you've roughly opened 4 tiles. As in most cases, every tile gives enough information that 4 should be enough, because that's roughly half the tiles in total. For instance, right there, this is what tells me this is either a 3 or 8, but prior to that, that could have even also been a 4. 4 gives me usually enough 50-50s that I like relying on it, that you're really going to see me fail during this, because I did several takes of any given level until I got it all done in one try. But that's because I'm a perfectionist about things like that. Speaking of getting that water out of his castle, though, welcome to Story 3, Let the Water Out. Now, something you can very easily tell in this level, or off the bat, is that sometimes you can get good indications if there's little secret coin troves and all that. Based on if there's any suspicious-looking tile sets like that, like if it's missing the second faded color as the background becomes the black void. But there are times where that's not exactly going to be the case anyway. It really does just depend on what the game wants to do to try and hide stuff for you. This here bubble is very important, though, when we need to destroy all these pots to get past it. The bubble is technically our second, because I missed one in the last stage, I think. State change for Wario. Wario doesn't get power-ups in this game in the traditional definition under most gaming. Instead of getting power-ups to change into a bull or a dragon or anything like that, interacting with certain enemies or things in the stage will just give him a new state of sorts. For instance, touching a bubble turns you into Bubble Wario, where you're just trapped in the bubble. You can control yourself moving left and right as you slowly float upwards, but touching any walls pops the bubble. But you want to be in the bubble in some cases, as it allows you to get past downward pushing currents, so keep that in mind. The annoying thing, and by annoying thing I mean the cool thing at the same time about this game's power-ups, is that every single power-up is both a boon and a hazard, or I guess obstacle more accurately, depending on what's happening in the level design around you. The other state change I've already seen for Wario that was in the last stage I forgot to talk about is Fire Wario. There's these little fire fox enemies. If you get touched by their fire attacks, Wario's ass is lit aflame. And then he'll just dash about wildly, trying to ignore the fact that he's on fire and get water. If you get in water during that state, the fire will be put out. There's times where the extra speed's nice, but the big thing is, if you let Wario burn up entirely, he will light a flame. And then your movement slows down to roughly about, I think, his basic walking speed. And then for a few seconds, that completely ablaze Wario can destroy fire blocks. With that said, you can also end that state early by entering water again. But eventually the fire does go out anyway. Managing the state changes for Wario is incredibly important, so get used to seeing a lot of them. What I just did right there is a switch block that'll often switch the states of things in the level, usually in different rooms. In this case, it actually changes the 2 rooms directly next to it, lowering the water in one and raising it in the other. And you want to do that to get in here to get just some extra coinage. But in order for progress, we do want to go through the door on the right. This is a game that, admittedly, with the way I play it, going for as many coins as possible, the playthrough does get slowed down, admittedly. To directly compare without bringing in speedrun numbers, even. My LP of the first game was 7 parts long. This is over double that. Now, admittedly, there are more levels, and they are generally longer levels to begin with. But this is a game, admittedly, where there's times I've picked it up and put it down about halfway through, very literally, even in some cases because of something the game does in its latter half. But it is very easy in my eyes to get burnt out on Wario Land 2. I think it is probably, I'm not going to say the worst paced in the series, but I think it's my least favorite to go for everything in because of its length, comparatively. 3 is a lot better about that. 4, for my own issues with it, it's pretty cool about that stuff. Shake It's also really neat. The only real game that I like less than this for getting 100% is probably Wario World. As someone who's, again, recently gone back to stream that. But I'll talk about that if I ever reach that, of a game. Also, one other thing that eagle-eyed viewers might have already noticed. There's one bit of editing I'm doing throughout this entire LP just to avoid certain issues. In that, whenever you go through a load of any kind like that, the screen briefly flashes white for a couple of frames every single time that happens. While there might be a couple I missed along the way, I have, throughout this LP, edited as many of those out as I can. Because there's times where if you're going through doors over and over again in certain stages where that can really start to hurt your eyes. And that's me without any kind of photosensitivity issues. And I'd like to avoid that being an issue for anyone watching along. So be wary of that if you're ever going to play this. The game flashes the screen pure white very frequently. One other mechanic the game has, though, if you go to a ramp like this and hold down, Wario will slide and eventually roll into a ball form, which allows him to also destroy certain blocks. That one doesn't come up as often as a lot of his other main abilities, but it's honestly one of my favorites because there's something about it that's just so satisfying. 3 stages down, several more times that to go. Or no, they do place some references amongst the various treasures in the game, but most of the obvious ones aren't until a little later. Something to note about the number matching minigame, though, is at the end of the day, it is, luck. So there's times where you might get the answer within a panel or 2. I've had times where it takes me up to 7 because they just refuse to give me any worthwhile notes to make it not seem like it's going to be a 2, 5, 6, 8, or 9. Because those are the things that really often get confused. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2, we're going to go finish off Chapter 1. See you guys then.